I wanted to talk a bit about both this New Zealand protest of one person, which the state felt the need to break up, but also lots of other stuff.
Sorry, hang on. So it's just one guy with a sign.
Yes. So they planned the protest. One guy turned up. Absolutely.
What did he plan it with? Did he talk to himself?
Well, I think the intention was there were to be more people, but it must have been either poorly organised or whatever, because I fail to imagine that one person is all the objection the New Zealand state is going to have to some of its policies, because, of course, the decision to place the country into a level 4 lockdown, which is the highest possible form of lockdown, was made after one case, which in and of itself was also called into question because there was questions of whether it was a false positive or not, and whether it was a matter of just a faulty test. So it's not even guaranteed that it was a legitimate case or not, but they went into lockdown and then only one person turns up.
I love the chat is just full of people being like, down with this sort of thing, careful now.
I don't want that English spirit to be infected with this New Zealand tyranny, though, to be fair. So apparently the police were alerted of a...
Alerted?
They were alerted of a gathering
Right.
of one person. Apparently, I'm reading a quote here. Police have been in the area and have spoken to one person who arrived intending to attend the protest. Police spoke to the individual, who was encouraged to comply with the alert level 4 restrictions and chose to leave. So they couldn't just let this one-man protest go on.
One man on his own, infecting nobody, doing nothing, but saying, careful now, down with this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's too much for the commie New Zealand authorities to deal with.
Apparently so. So it goes on to say, an account on Instagram called on people who see the bigger picture to get involved in the protest. The post criticised Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and the government for destroying the economy and destroying jobs. And then the article goes on to point out that despite the unemployment rate dropping to 4% in June 2021 quarter, and the economy weathering the pandemic better than expected. And this is actually the interesting point here. It's not the fact that the protest was attended by one person, it's the economic stuff that they point out. And you think, well, how can that be right? We know that loads of businesses have had to shut down for a very long time. Lots of high street places have closed. So I've looked into this and the actual economics of it, and this is actually very surprising. So with the UK's data, because I know all of that stuff pretty intricately, apparently our GDP dropped by 9.9%. But of course, GDP, as any economist will tell you, is just one marker of an economy, and there are lots of other markers. So supposedly, small businesses were most impacted by turnover, with a slight around 1% decrease in turnover. But medium and large businesses actually increased turnover on the whole, and the number of companies actually increased throughout the lockdown. And you know, this seems very counterintuitive, doesn't it? Like you think, well, everything was closed. How is this happening? And of course, the fact is that it's backed by lots of borrowing, but people have also seen all these shops and things on the high street close down. However, it's the online sector that's growing a lot to take over. And of course, this was a trend that was happening well before the pandemic. And of course, there is the high street shops being closed because the owners are leveraging the credit rating of these companies to take on more debt, make more money, and then of course, declare bankruptcy as well. So it's not entirely pandemic. All these things are closing it down anyway. However, the fact that the economy and economies of lots of Western countries that have locked down is largely unaffected is actually a lot worse than it sounds, because, of course, it makes it easier for the government to keep us at home, because ultimately their bottom line, the money that they're making, isn't going to be so affected as you might think. So this doesn't bode well for future lockdowns and things like that. However, as I mentioned earlier, the UK borrowed 299 billion to pay for the first year of lockdown, although you know the UK's always run a deficit. And for example, 2016 to 17, we spent 772 billion in government spending. So just a quick aside on the economics, that point raised is that actually, yeah, the economy isn't as badly affected as we thought, but that's not good because they're just going to use it as an excuse to lock us down more. But the protests weren't just one person in New Zealand. There were massive crowds in London, as we can see from this video here. So supposedly this is part of the ongoing protest that happens pretty much, it seems, every weekend. And I wanted to cover this again. Nothing particularly interesting happened. It was just a mostly peaceful protest, but I'm not using it ironically. Where people just went for a wander with some placards and stuff, and none of the media outlets really cover it. They cover it really badly. So here's this next video is a protest in Newcastle over the weekend, where the police use a police dog on a, I suppose, anti-lockdown protester. So if we could start that one. I'm not entirely sure what he's done to deserve this, so maybe he did something bad. I'm going to have that caveat, but it's pretty awful, to be fair. And then they just walk over with the dog. Obviously, the dog's meant to be used to catch people. And it's grabbing the shirt. I think that's So obviously they're not using proportionate amounts of force.
Jesus. Just drops it.
That was a bit of his t-shirt, I think. Thankfully it wasn't biting his arm. Don't touch it. But anyway, yeah, it grabbed his t-shirt, thankfully. So
for people listening, like this guy comes running down some alleyway, some cop's trying to talk to him or grab him, and he runs into another cop, so he tries to run away again, so the second cop runs at him, and they tackle him, which presumably he's done something, they need to arrest him, or just making assumptions. And they get him down, and then some other guy, some third cop who's standing nearby, sees that they're trying to trace this guy, so he tries to come in and help. But of course, he's holding a dog on a lead, a police dog. So the dog here, I mean, you can't blame the dog. I mean, the dog...
It's been trained to do this sort of thing, yeah.
Being the good boy that it is, which is that it sees the person that the copper has ran towards and goes in for a bite and starts biting this guy who's on the ground, and then the guy who's brought in this dog is now trying to punch the dog to try and get it to stop biting someone on the ground who's clearly not a threat.
Yeah, he was being held down by the police whilst this dog was biting him.
Yeah.
And obviously that's not how police dogs are meant to be used at all. And this is the kind of thing where, had it happened under the kind of guise of another event, everyone would be up in arms, but no one's talking about it.
For this one, no one cares. If he had bought, if it went to, what was it, the Sarah Everard vigil, which the cops went to, and the dog started biting the hair and shirt of some woman, then, the entire country would be having
never hear the end of it, would we?
That police officer's life would be over. I mean, not just his career, like his personal life would be over. Which,
God forbid that happened at a Black Lives Matter rally.
Yeah. Jesus Christ.
But no, we haven't heard about it because it was an anti-lockdown protest.
Can we go back to that first article, though? Because I don't think you mentioned that there was something at the end there as well, which I found really funny. Like, you can read, so what was it? Last week, around 100 lockdown protesters gathered in Queen Street, and 4 of them were arrested. I mean, again, they're just like these tiny protests where they're not upsetting anyone. The chances of infection are incredibly low, and yet still not enough. They arrested 4 people. 4 people were also arrested at a protest of around 20 people in the city of Tauranga. 20 people went to a protest, and the cops turned up and arrested 4 of them. Yeah,
it is ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, New Zealand in particular is probably one of the worst cases of government tyranny in response to COVID we've probably seen in the Western world.
I mean, they list another one there. Another group gathered outside a police station in South Island city of Nelson the same day. They don't name the number, so presumably it's 5 people or another one. But dispersed after officers issued 20 verbal warnings.
But it's so kind of worrying that the most authoritarian regime is also the one that has the smallest protests.
Yeah, the smallest amount of dissent cannot be tolerated.
Unbelievable. But anyway, I'm going to make you even more annoyed because we're going to have a look at some of the reporting from the Daily Mail about some of the protests. So they say thousands of anti-vaxxers march through London in massive medical freedom demonstrations against vaccine passports. So 2 very different things here as well. Against vaccine passports, but they also deliberately use the term anti-vaxxers because that's used as a slur now, basically.
Those are 2 different groups.
Yeah, they're 2 different groups, but the media keeps on conflating them all the time. So At this point, I think it's almost deliberate, isn't it, to wind people up, just to say, okay, it was all these anti-vaxxers, when in reality, it's people against mandated vaccines and vaccine passports, which that's a perfectly liberal cause, perfectly reasonable in a civil society to protest.
There are many people who are anti-mandate because they want people to get the vaccine. If you mandate it, then people are going to be upset, rebel, suspicious. That's the argument for the pro-vaccine, anti-mandate argument. That can't exist and you be an anti-vaxxer. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it should be your choice. You shouldn't be compelled to take anything or put anything in your body by the government. That's
the liberal position. But,
yes, it is indeed. But it just seems to me that even, especially the Mail as well, this is meant to be, right-leaning, the main one. And where are you going? Ooh,
it's just one of Carl references. Whenever you mention the right wing, like a right-wing newspaper, right-wing my ass.
Well, on some things they are like they like making fun of woke people, but also
so many left-wing people.
Yeah, I suppose. But even they meant to be our opposition media, apparently not. But never mind. So I'm going to move on to what's happening in Australia. There is some resistance going on there as well. This is annoying coverage by the Mail again, which I thought was interesting. But at least I suppose they are covering it, as opposed to some of the other outlets which are just ignoring it. But they say Australian truck drivers blocked roads in protest against the COVID-19 lockdowns in Australia. And many truckers particularly took issue with the vaccine requirements for crossing state borders. So that would mean that if they were to continue in their job, they would have to get a vaccine or face losing their job just for crossing state borders within Australia itself, which seems a little bit strong and heavy-handed in my view. Supposedly the truckers blocked the M1 motorway in Reedy Creek, south of Brisbane, as of this morning. Apparently the traffic was backed up for several kilometres before the person in charge of the protest said an hour later, that's enough. We're going to stop holding people up now. So at least they are protesting in a somewhat considerate way. And they say in the article, yes, actually, some of the people who were held up were kind of honking their horns and putting their thumbs up in support, even though they had been held up. So Extinction Rebellion take notes. You don't annoy people by holding them up all day. Maybe hold them up for a little bit at most, but I don't really think this tends to work.
Yeah, unless you're trying to destroy the country. I mean, I remember I don't remember it because I wasn't old enough to remember, but the fuel protests. So when truckers in the UK would literally go around just like blocking fuel depots and driving on the motorways to hold people up and whatnot. Unless you're really gonna put the pedal to the metal and see how far you can take things before the government buckle. Don't be a bellend about it.
That's one way of putting it. But for example, the Mail here talks to one of the organisers here, Tony Fulton, who says, we want to end these lockdowns, we don't want forced vaccinations, and we want to open up the country and to learn to live with the virus. These are not things that are not admirable.
This is government strategy in the UK, YouTube, if you're listening. Like, this is the standard for most Western countries at this point, not for Australia, it seems, and that's their folly. Absolutely.
And this is interesting here, I thought. This is more kind of questionable reporting by them. He admits that he's somewhat apprehensive about getting the vaccine. He's a bit worried about it. And then the Mail writes here, fears about the vaccine have been noticeably absent among those who have issued heartfelt pleas from their hospital beds after being struck down by COVID while unvaccinated. That's just such a blatant and obvious just like dismissal of perfectly valid liberal opposition to these policies. And it's just trying to browbeat people with emotive responses. I mean, it's appalling, really. But anyway, protests have also continued in France. Apparently, over the weekend, 160,000 people turned out to protest the pretty strict rules as far as the...
So in France, they have done mandatory vaccinations, and it is that if you want to go to Live and Life, then you have to have the app with your vaccine certificate on it, papers, please style, and, not very liberal, very French.
Isn't it? I think it's anyone entering a restaurant, theatre or cinema or a long-distance train, or a shopping centre must show proof of vaccination to even enter.
So we had the amazing protest strategy of sitting outside the restaurant and just having a picnic.
That's protest done right, where you're not getting in anyone's way, but you're showing hypocrisy. Someone could just look at you and say, okay, why are they sat next to these restaurants? Oh, it's because of the
Yeah, isn't
mandate.
it awful that this restaurant does that? You shouldn't do that.
Yeah, when people are minding their own business as well, they're more likely to win sympathy, but never mind. So supposedly the protests in France have been continuing. This is the 7th one in a row. The last one was 200,000 people. I don't think there's any chance of stopping, but I thought it's important to cover this stuff because very few outlets actually are bothering anymore. So it is important to know that people are actually, letting their objections be heard and not giving up. And I think a lot of people get the feeling that they have been given up on in a way and nothing's going to change, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Thank you for watching this clip from the podcast The Lotus Eaters. If you want more from us, please go over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to get access to all the premium content that we have on the site.
Yeah, we've got loads of really good stuff there. So we've been doing this for quite some time. So we've got a huge library of content in various different categories. Now, some of my favourites have been the book clubs. I'm personally a big fan of these because it means we get to read good books and important books, extract the useful information out of them, such as with this Roger Scruton's Where We Are, which is a very interesting conservative take on the current culture wars and the state of Britain at the moment. So we go through and explore the meaningful concepts. And here's one that you and Bo did with Frank Dicotta's Mao's Great Famine. It's absolutely brilliant and harrowing to read. And so when all the comments on this were happened to be, well, this was vile, we knew we'd done a good job with it. And we also have many other premium series like the Contemplations, where Hugo and Josh just go through and find something very interesting to talk about, such as this one talks about the idea of political representation and does it work, or is it a bit of a myth? And of course, we have the history content, which probably my personal favourite in this particular one. Myself and Bo talked about the achievements of Frankish warlord Charles Martel. Do you know what he's famous for, Callum?
Stopping the Muslims at Tours.
That's right. And we also do a bunch of premium videos and interviews and things like this. So in this one, we happen to have an interview with Michael Malice, who's a very, very charming guest, and I very much enjoyed this one. And we also do a bunch of premium podcasts about stuff that perhaps isn't appropriate for YouTube or various other platforms like that because of, some things outside of their editorial bounds.
So if you'd like to get access to all that premium content, please go over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe for as low as £5 a month. Thank you.